Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Marian Masone from the Film Society of Lincoln Center. And on behalf of the Film Society and the Museum of Modern Art, I want to welcome you to, I think this is the 42nd edition, or is it the 43rd? I don't know. I've been here so long I start to forget. But of New Directors, New Films, which is a program that's so close to my heart. It's been a 42 or 43-year collaboration between the Film Society and the Museum of Modern Art. So I'm happy to welcome you all here to the first full day of New Directors and to our screening tonight of this wonderful Canadian debut feature, Tower. It's a really intriguing kind of film that you kind of look at and go, oh my God, here's this guy in the suburbs, what's he doing? But there's this wonderful, to me, sort of absurdist, surrealist quality to this very realistic kind of setting. I'm very happy that the filmmakers are here, so we're going to be able to continue discussion about this film once you've seen it and afterwards. I want to thank Telefilm Canada, who helped with the transportation to bring our filmmakers down from Toronto. Not too far, but Telefilm Canada, they help us with all things Canadian. And so we're very happy to thank them and to have the gentleman here. And I have this piece of paper because the director has a name that I'm going to try to pronounce. I really hope I don't mangle it. But to introduce the film, please welcome to the stage the producer of Tower, Dan Montgomery. That was easy. And the director, Kazik Radwanski. Did I do that correctly? Oh my God, here they come. Gentlemen.
Hi everyone. Thank you for coming out to see our film. It means a lot for us to screen here. We'd like to thank Marian and the rest of the programming team for inviting Tower for its US premiere.
I'll just echo what Dan said. Yeah, it's just a huge honor for us to be playing here. I never like to say too much about the film before, but I look forward to discussing it after. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, I'll begin, then we'll throw it out to you. So, Kaz, this is your first feature film, and people always say, your first film, write about what you know. So you're not Derek, are you?
The film, in many ways, is terribly introspective.
Mm-hmm.
It's very personal,
Mm-hmm.
and I became sort of self-conscious of that. I think what I like to do is really, conceptualize the film in great depth, and then find somebody and sort of ground it in maybe the differences between me and that person.
Uh-huh.
So much of the film kind of changed or sort of evolved once we met Derek.
Mm-hmm.
But in many ways, though, very sort of problems, ideas that are haunting me for a while that I relate to quite deeply.
So it becomes you. Before and we will talk about Derek. But let's just, the two of you, so you, Dan, is producing, because I did a little research, and you've made a number of shorts that you've also produced. So just talk a little bit about your, your relationship in terms of making these films and how you came about to make this film. You wrote the film also, Kaz, right? And did you have much discussion about that with the ideas of it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess Kaz and I have made a bunch of short films, about 4 or 5 short films together. So we developed, I guess, a huge amount of trust. So in many ways, this film was a bit of a leap for us. But I think inherently we had built up this working process and level of commitment to the projects before. So I knew that when Kaz came to me with this idea, even though it was sort of a loose structure of a film in many ways, that it was something we wanted to pursue together. So everyone that made the short films together made this feature together, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we could have made this film without making those short films first. I don't think I could have made this film without Dan. I don't think I could have described this to someone or convinced someone to help me make this film. I think, it was through the strength of our relationship from previous collaborations, yeah. You're not missing too much. There's no real, the title's not meant to be too telling. It really, in a funny way, was one of the initial ingredients when I was sort of thinking about the film. It was basically a man and a city. I guess one thing about Toronto you might not know is there's a CN Tower there. So, I mean, that was sort of something what it kind of represented to me was kind of this big mass, this big sort of object, and sort of it just seemed like a great way to sort of ground these sort of evasive ideas, sort of these, it was sort of this big monolith or big elephant in the room is kind of what it represents to me, but also at the same time a tower, sort of like a figure of a person. To me, I mean, I like the irony that a tower could be something powerful to tower over something, and it's maybe at times a pathetic story. But also just sort of this idea, again, of sort of self-created sort of loneliness, to sort of, that it's powerful and sort of lonely at the same time. But yeah, it is sort of oblique in the same way that the cut is as well. We actually had a scene in the film where it explained a bit more about what happened, but we just loved, I think when I started to think about it, so much of it was not knowing how he got the cut and maybe not knowing what he does most nights, and at times when it's maybe he's his most passionate trying to reach out and meet people, but it's sort of forgotten the next day that he goes out and gets drunk, and it sort of represents this sort of desire, but then it's also kind of erased the morning after. But the cut, it was sort of this sort of silly reminder.
No, it is. It's sort of what I like, this idea of it, like, it's just this plain guy in this plain city, but then there are all these, you know, almost like mysteries or something that are just never quite explained.
The actors were never given a script. But at the same time,
Do you actually have a script, or do you just have like a storyboard, or?
For this film, I had a skeleton of a script. So there was maybe 70 scenes that I wrote, about a paragraph for each one. I intentionally wrote sort of more scenes that I knew we could film to almost encourage us to drop things and to constantly have to rethink it. And sort of, I was really afraid making a first feature to sort of have a screenplay, and that just to get so exhausted making the film or just overwhelmed that we would just sort of push the film through and rely on the screenplay. And I've never felt too, I don't know, comfortable with that it's, again, it's something that we sort of developed through making shorts and this sort of process. But while it is improvised, it's heavily rehearsed, that we would do 12 or 15 takes, and the takes would be 10 minutes long, that we would do many reshoots too to go back and refine it more. But so much of it was, again, learning from Derek, sort of falling in love with how he talked and sort of learning how he might act in certain situations and sort of almost tailoring the film to him at times. And sort of, but many ways that I would just sort of, I would have a very specific idea of the emotions I wanted from a scene and the nature of the conflict, and that the words could be anything as long as sort of the feeling felt right, if that makes sense.
So let's talk about Derek. Where did you find him?
We found him, and I guess what's becoming an increasingly common way to find actors is we found him online. We did a casting process where it took us a few months to sort of eventually find him. We saw maybe 30 or 40 people, and but in a funny way, I think Derek kind of found us. I think he realized similarities between his personal life and the character. That it was something, and that's something I could tell when I met him. It's something that he wanted to explore, and he was thinking about it in a way that I found very interesting. But yeah, I never pictured Derek looking like that. I never imagined him having that haircut, or I never imagined him being, I mean, I initially imagined the character being a lot bigger. I imagined the construction scenes making more sense, like he looked like somebody a bit more physically imposing, or somebody that looked like he worked with his hands for a living. But then it became interesting that he was so out of place on the construction side. So yeah, lots of things were enhanced by the similarities of Derek, and then many things sort of grew out of things that were different. So the Derek is very much like the character in many ways, but he's also the polar opposite of the character in many ways too, which I think created some really interesting sort of tensions in the film or in certain scenes.
So talk a little, and maybe you can too, Dan, as you're going through this process and of doing lots of rehearsing, but also lots of shooting. Did you do like sort of a rehearsal, you know, of this improvisation?
I think an important thing to say might be, how long did we spend shooting this film?
We shot over the course of 8 months, like intentionally so drawn out. I think we shot about 50 days of shooting. But another important distinction is that we had never actually held rehearsals. We were always there with the camera. We were filming the rehearsals, and some of our favorite moments, you know, were those that we found right away. Some of our favorite moments are those that we really had to chip away at. Another thing that's important to our working process is that we simultaneously edit as we shoot. So that it gives us that opportunity to go back and reshoot. It's something we've always embraced, or something we've always been digital filmmakers, are always embraced non-linear editing, and that idea that we can be editing as we're shooting. We like the idea of pickups, or we like the idea of chipping away at the film, sculpting it over time. Yeah.
And I have to say something too. This film has a running time of 78 minutes, and you were talking about this idea of not wanting to just like go with the script, et cetera. And I absolutely appreciate and the idea of editing too. And so many times, especially with new filmmakers, you can't take things out. I mean, I think you worked really, really hard at saying we have to take this out, and so to make a very nice, concise thing.
Yeah, I think an important thing to say is that the aesthetic was there before the film. That's an aesthetic I use and have used in my shorts. And I think when I think back to why I do it, I mean, really, ultimately, it was just an impulse that I was just drawn to people's faces. I made documentaries, and I just love the feeling of being so close to someone's face and it being somewhat mysterious. And I think, I mean, after making more short films that way, and then ultimately the feature, I think it's just the relationship between the camera and the person. Like, I love the feeling of being intimate with them, but at the same time, it being uncomfortable. That it should be uncomfortable to be this close to someone, that we shouldn't be allowed such a comfortable position to sort of judge someone. That I think it's something I really rely on, is that as a constant sort of disorientation or something, so that we can sort of not prejudge the character too much. That I think also by being so close, it sort of encourages almost an objective reading. That I hope so that is sort of, and again with the dialogue being unscripted, that I'm not in complete control of what's going on in the character's head, that I'm not scripting each line or word that comes out of his mouth, that he's, in the same way that maybe what's going on in his life is a mystery to himself, it's still a mystery to me, that I don't have all the answers. And it's, I think, yeah, something about that relationship I'm still endlessly fascinated with. Yeah, no, I have quite a close collaboration with my editor. Her name's Isla, and yeah, so we've done 4 short films together, and now this feature. So yeah, there's a lot of trust between us. Yeah, again, in terms of trimming the film down, I really like to step away from it and sort of see. I'm always sort of inspired by what she comes up with. But then at the same time, I would be sort of simultaneously editing my own cut, and I would see her cut, and then I'd sort of have ideas of how to change it or my own ideas. But yeah, I mean. Definitely, yeah, I guess the mixture as to who I definitely really value our collaboration.
And then it's also because, as you say, you're editing as you're going, which is something you can do now very digitally. Do you ever find yourself as you're going along of going, well, maybe we shouldn't have done this, and you go back and you're sort of going to edit a different way? Was there any of that, or was it all pretty much, what you were all determining along with your editor just went into like a flow?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the more crucial things is that something amazing will happen on set, and then we'll be able to sort of shoot more and structure it around to sort of support that really amazing moment or thing that we want to sort of highlight or include more in the film. Yeah, that's something we've always liked, and to sort of I guess it's the idea of being. I mean, I guess improvisation or things like that can mean so many things, but for us, it's really being inspired by the material, sort of something happening and us reacting to it. It's sort of grounding it in sort of what actually are we getting on screen and what's actually working. I think the best way to say is everyone in the film is non-union. Okay. A lot are quite active. Then we'll do sort of community theater, or we'll do student projects, things like that. But yeah, something I always look for. I always like it's almost, there's a few completely non-actors, people I knew in real life and wanted in the film, but there's something I've always kind of liked of somebody not being totally aware of themselves on camera, but at the same time still having the sort of passion to want to work on a film. That I've always liked working with aspiring actors, because they never sort of give up, and they give me a lot of trust, and sort of, which is a really important element in the film. But yeah, there's some people that, like Danny, for instance, who was the Irish construction worker that worked with him, and the story he tells, for instance, that's his real life story, and just sort of, so there's a few elements of that in the film too.
And so now, and you're talking about him telling the story that really happened to him. Is this something because, you didn't do rehearsal before, you were always shooting, you were rehearsing with people, and is this, for instance, this example of the story that he told, were you shooting and doing something and he came up with the story, or did you sort of know it beforehand and say, let's incorporate this into, like, how?
It's a good example for that. We definitely knew before that we wanted Danny and him telling a story, but what became interesting was just the dynamic of it, that there was this person telling their real story, the much more sort of easier to empathize with, but like a real sort of problem, like having to leave a country to find new work, and saying that in the context of a fictional film to a person that was an actor. So that we had sort of the idea that it would be to lie to him in the scene as well. that it became something that that the scene grew in that way on set to sort of. I mean, it became sort of a really sort of interesting idea, which isn't, I think, totally negative. I feel like it shows something interesting about Derek, that he wants to sort of be a part of it. It sort of shows that he knows that he's different and he wants to have these stories. But yeah, that was definitely an example of a scene kind of coming to life a bit more through shooting it.
Also, there's this sense, I see it in so many films now, and I love it, that, you know, I've called hybrid films. One of my colleagues on the selection committee calls it those sort of in-between films. And they're films that really sort of combine nonfiction and fiction, if you will, in any number of different ways. Different films can do it. You can use non-professional actors and they're sort of playing themselves, or you can just have something that seems like people are just, you know, regular people doing their things in daily life. And here you've got what could be thinking, oh, right, are these people, are they just like real people, non-professional actors, and you're just sort of documenting these people walking around? But no, it's just, they just seem that way. But then again, you bring in like an actual true story. And I don't know, for me, it's like, as a viewer, I have this theory of films, but I don't know if as a filmmaker you have a kind of theory of mixing together these things.
I think, aside from what I was saying earlier about the camera work, that like it's important at times that it feels like a documentary, and sort of for the way I want to sort of interact with sort of ideas about the story. But yeah, in many ways it's sort of an off-camera tension that the audience doesn't really need to know, but it's almost like relationships between actors that develop throughout the film become sort of, it's hard to know if it seems almost like a real life, like the real life relationship is, maybe you can illustrate it better through talking about a scene, but like the breakup scene, that Derek and Nicole become somewhat good friends. And when I sort of set up scenes, I never talk about the scene as a whole with all the actors. I always sort of keep it separate. And before that scene, Nicole didn't know that she was going to be broken up with, and Derek didn't know that he was going to dump her in that scene. And what made it even more interesting was that Derek knew that Nicole didn't know. So there was almost the real life tension of him knowing that the film was going to end, or her part in that he was sort of ending her relationship with the film. And that almost is where I think a lot of, if at times feels somewhat more palpable, like his nervousness comes from his sort of feelings, I think, of sort of telling her that she's out of the film in a strange way. Yeah.
Sort of, like, sorry, you know, pick up your check.
Yeah. It was a huge challenge, and I think again it helped from us making short films in a similar manner, that we'd shoot them for 2 or 3 months. Right. In a sort of crude way, we just sort of multiplied that for the length of the feature and planned accordingly. That, in many ways, my initial notes, I think, sort of match up to what the film is, and that Dan and I, again, sort of know each other quite well now, and we're able to sort of plan it in that way. But more importantly, with the actors, for me, it was just so important to sort of almost preserve, at times, their, maybe not even preserve, but it was important for them to sort of discover the emotions themselves, at times, that we would sort of have multiple plans of how to get there. But, and I even tried crazy things at times, like I would I have like an iPhone, and I would like record conversations of situations that were very similar to the film. At times, almost exactly what I wanted, and I would play it to the actors, or I would transcribe it, and that never really worked. That it would be for me, it's just so important to sort of do the scene with them and them to discover it through the scene. And then there's, I mean, from experience of working with things, we know how to sort of react and sort of grow those performances, but it's so important for there to be that sort of discovery, and that just, I mean, it's very hard at the beginning to sort of found that foundation of a character, but then once we sort of have that developed, then it becomes a lot easier. Like we always sort of felt that way with our short films, that it was almost a shame that they were short films, that we'd put so much work into sort of creating this character, or why not let them live a bit longer and sort of,
and I guess, I mean, logistically speaking, we structure our film in many ways like a documentary. So the crew, at its smallest, is only three. Like I do the sound as well, and then we have a camera guy, and then it's Kaz directing the actors. So at its smallest is 3 of us, maybe at its most 5 or 6 crew members. But you know, we own a lot of our own gear as well, and we treat it like a documentary in the way that, you know, it's going to it's going to take some time to make this film, but it's not a question of trying to organize 20 or 30 crew members to be there. It's, you know, there's 3 or 4 of us that are there at any given time when we want to start shooting.
I suppose practically, in many ways, it's like shooting a documentary. I mean, it's a fictional character, but we're sort of following a character at times. Yeah.
And how do you, because you talk about your cast, and as you say to describe and that they are non-union, so I am going to, you know, presume that a lot of them don't do a lot of, you know, professional community theater and haven't done that much professional work, and so how you know, how were they? Because I so this is a film that is not shot, certainly in not the classic way of, like, you know, years ago, how you shoot a film, you did this and this, and certainly, and I'm going to say, because I'm as old as probably Derek's parents are, for the, you know, for the older actors who might be used to working, if they're working in film a certain way, was this discombobulating for them? Were they really into it, this way that you worked?
At times, yeah, always a bit somewhat disorienting, but yeah, again, it was sort of once we built that foundation.
But of course,
then
the
we
disorient probably worked for you.
I mean, it's like I love getting to the point where we don't have to talk about it anymore. That we sort of have the situation and it kind of dictates it, and we can sort of come to certain scenes in really sort of organic ways. Right. But yeah, I mean, I have huge respect for professional actors and hope to one day be able to work with them. But yeah, no, I find great comfort in working with amateurs or people with less experience. It just seems so much, there's so less pretense, and it's so much just about we're doing this and let's do it until it sort of feels good and feels right, and I mean, so much about it is about trust and just making sure people are getting enough out of the project and sort of that they really believe in their characters and are interested in them. Yeah.
And I think they help too, because it's different people have been referencing things like this about with these kinds of actors, and with the story too. It's like, because you're not making this film that has, like, you know, the big drama and it goes this way and that way, and it's just always this, you know, this sort of way, and all of the different things you've done with your actors and with your script and the way you work, it just works towards that, you know. And towards that end, well, let me just ask this. Towards that end, talk about, there's not a lot of music in it, you know, certainly. But talk about the music that you use. Is some of it original music?
Well, we had a great sound mixer that also is a DJ, and so they actually composed quite a few tracks. So there's a few times where there'd be, like, the one of the shots near the opening when he's in the club. Mm-hmm. That there was an actual song, and then he actually had one that was very similar that we were able to match up with. The one song, though, that we, there's this, I don't know if it's popular in New York, definitely is in Toronto, because there's a huge sort of Caribbean community, and you hear it on the radio all the time, was the Serrani track where he's dancing to it in the basement, and you hear it in the club. So that we had to clear. Yeah. And that was always, a pretty important element, that we wanted it to be. I remember also just talking about the film initially, that I wanted the film to feel like a song stuck in your head. It was sort of, I felt like that was true to some of the nature of the problems, and is it a problem or is not? Is he aware of his situation? Just the idea of things sort of seeping in and seeping out. So we really wanted something you could hear on the radio, and that's something that was sort of out of place for him at the same time too, but a song that you could almost take seriously, that there is some emotion to it, that it is a bit of a ballad. Yeah. So it took us a while to clear that song, and that was a lot of work.
I mean, it was always an ingredient that we were interacting with in the film too. So you know, we kind of committed to that song, or the idea of using a song like that from early on. So it was something that we kept coming back to. I think we used it about five times in the film. So
yeah, I mean, Toronto is probably like the raccoon capital of the world.
I did not know that.
That there really are, and there's like news stories, like there's a big news story of a man killing a raccoon with a shovel, and like a huge trial around it and things like that. But I mean, I've always loved sort of like Herzog films and his use of nature and sort of dancing chickens and things like that. And I wanted to sort of somehow find an element that was fitting for Toronto and fitting for this type of story, that is almost laughable at one time, but at the same time is sort of a wild animal. Yeah. And yeah, it just seems like the right ending, that you get to see Derek in all these different sort of moods. Sort of, you get to sort of experience him, and it's sort of funny, it's almost cute, then it's threatening, then he's getting I don't know if people think that the dogs are going to kill the raccoon, or who knows. But
something also interesting to notice, Kaz came to me really early on with the idea that it was important that Kaz had to catch the raccoon himself. So
you did?
The one in the cage, Kaz caught himself. It was a pretty nasty thing.
You can go and just buy these cages at like think. It's called like Canadian Tire. It's like a Kmart. But yeah, and then I trapped I think 3 or 4 different raccoons. Sort of that's how present they are. Like every night, if you set it up, there'll be 4 raccoons sort of circling it, and then you'll trap them, and then you release them, and they'll come back right away. Like it's they're very used to being around people. That I just.
And then Kaz said, "Do you think it'd be possible if we had a raccoon loose in the house?" Yeah. And we thought at that point we should probably hire like an animal trainer. So the second raccoon that's not in the cage is a very cuddly, docile raccoon. Like between takes, it would sort of roll over on its back and start like, you know, wanting you to pet its tummy. So yeah, there's 2 raccoons in the film.
Oh, good. That makes me feel much, much better. Although I will just say that I actually about 2 years ago, roaming around in my neighborhood in Brooklyn was a raccoon about this big. Yeah, I'm just saying.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah. No, I sort of love how, I mean, how he's so much of the film is about his animation at first, and that just kind of fades away, and then suddenly he's obsessed with the raccoon. So yeah, I think so much of it is about him maybe creating purpose for himself, and I like that about the character, that he's in many ways he's sort of a weak character, but he is driven in some ways. That the ice baths as well are sort of misplaced. But yeah, no, and as a filmmaker and as an artist, I think many people, I guess, relate to that. Definitely was huge for us coming out of film school and working independently and just making, so there is, no, it's a nice take on that. I think it's very much in line with some of the ideas. It touches on something I think a lot of people, maybe not to that extent or that extreme of putting a dog in a raccoon cage, but I think, it's something about things that people do when they're alone, and it just sort of, that there definitely is sort of, why is he doing that, and where is this coming from, and there's sort of this uncontrolled, maybe juvenile tendencies, and sort of, so that I think it.
That's how we see more about him.
Yeah.
The gentleman's name is Ray. He is someone we cast. He the headshot he sent in, it was about 30 years old, we found out. He looked like he was 50 in his headshot. It's this sort of black and white glossy, and he actually showed up with I guess a chaperone from the nursing home that he was at. And I guess he found this casting call online, and he saw that it had some element of singing in it, and it was something that he I guess he really wanted to do. So some of those like scenes in the film, like he was almost like he was doing vocal warm-ups, and we heard him doing that, and so we started shooting him doing that. But he was just so into the idea of doing this performance on the subway. He was great. I mean, in between takes, people would be clapping for him on the subway, or the people would just stop and start applauding. So I think he got a real kick out of it. But he was someone we cast for the role, and it's one of my favorite scenes in the film, I'd say.
So you don't go to Toronto and wander the subways to try to find this guy and clock him. That's unfortunately, we've been here for a while, so that's all we have time for. But thank you for all your questions, and thank you for all your answers, and actually for this film. It was a blast.
Yeah, thank you, guys. And thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.